Hey there, my GTN listeners. Welcome to episode 4 of our series, Trailblazing Women, Exceptional Stories of Female Leaders, sponsored by Miss Wit. Today, we're diving deep into a unique blend of professional powers and personal growth. Our spotlight shines on Katarina Polonsky, a high-performance relationship coach and a gender dynamic social scientist. With a master's from Oxford and roles at Mind Gym and Better Up, Katarina has a rich tapestry of experiences, from overcoming personal challenges to mastering the art of relationships. Katarina combines behavioral science, coaching, and mindfulness to help successful individuals excel in their personal lives as well as their careers. She's here to share her transformative 90-day program and insights on balancing professional success with personal fulfillment. Get ready for an episode that bridges career achievement with relationship success. Let's welcome Katarina Polonsky, Trailblazing Women, Exceptional Stories of Female Leaders. Hey, Katarina, welcome to the Girl Techno podcast. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
I'm excited to have this conversation to talk about this topic with relationships, high achievers, and, and I think relationships are so important, not just in personal relationships, but as business relationships as well. I feel like if you can master your strategies and your tactics, I guess, in personal relationships, then that translate over into business relationships. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. They're all interlinked.
Yes, exactly. So before we kick things off, could you kind of share a little bit about yourself and how you ended up as a high achiever performance coach in gender dynamics, social sciences?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's kind of like multiple prongs to the story. So maybe I'll start with the gender angle.
Yes.
And I can probably trace this back to like growing up in Eastern Europe, which is a very, very gendered society. And yeah, I grew up, there's actually like a little photograph of me in a little kind of like ballerina dress thing holding a teacup. So cute. I think I look like really irritated though. Like I don't think I want to be in it. And honestly, my whole life, like from moving to the UK and then doing ballet, and then I went to a really good girls' school, I've always been really aware of gender and what it means to be a feminine being in a woman's body. And looking at, I have a brother and my father, and like going to a girls' school was very informative. It was really interesting. There were so many different types of femininity, and I kind of got really curious about it, I think from literally the age of like 12. And I remember in my English literature class, like always being drawn to studying the masculine figures, the feminine figures, trying to understand the differences. And I remember at one point studying communication between the two genders. And I remember saying at the age of 16 to my favorite teacher, saying, like, mark my words, I'm going to study this at uni. And she kind of laughed and she was like, you're 16, like, what do you know? And then I went to uni and I studied a very different topic. I did like American history, philosophy, and economics with English literature, like very random. But within that, I actually studied the civil rights movements, and I was really interested in intersectionality. And I went on to do my thesis on masculinity. And so, and specifically, I was looking at like white male blue collar masculinity, because I was really curious about like that demographic with one of the writers I was really into. And looking at kind of, like the limitations of that gender construct. I can talk about this for days. But anyhow, so then I studied that, left, went on to, work in a very different career. And then about probably 6 years later, I was living in Dubai in the Middle East.
Oh, Dubai.
And I was living out there and really didn't enjoy being out there. I know there's a lot of people there right now. Yeah, I did not like it. Again, it was like a long time ago, over 10 years ago. But being there as a single blonde Eastern European female, it didn't go well for me. Like back then, I might be very different now.
Yeah.
I remember feeling very uncomfortable in so many situations. And again, just being very aware that being, in a feminine, being a feminine being isn't safe here.
Yeah.
And so that got me then curious to look around. That got me curious around, again, gender again. But I think what really piqued my curiosity because it wasn't like I was unfamiliar with feeling unsafe as a woman, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But it was really actually looking around and seeing the different hierarchies of masculinity out there and recognizing, okay, well, intersectionality comes to a different whole new level here, because actually there are so many different races that I'm seeing in Dubai and such a hierarchy when I look at like the labor systems, and it just broke my heart. Like, it honestly broke my heart. I found it really disturbing. I actually became very depressed living out there. Yeah. And that's when I decided I've had enough. I'm going to go back to university. I'm going to study this in depth. And I'm probably going to go work in, international aid work or charity sector or something. I really want to do something about this. I believe in justice and human rights and equality. And so that's what led me to then go back to university. I went to Oxford and I did a degree in women's studies. That was like the title there. And so I studied intersectional feminism, but I, again, kind of looked at masculinity as well as femininity. And so that's kind of where I bolstered my academic work. And after that, I did work in philanthropy for a little bit. And then that kind of led me over a few years to work in behavioral science, where I specialized in diversity, equity, and inclusion. So DE&I is kind of where I've landed from a corporate perspective. And I mean, I love diversity, equity, and inclusion. It has its own issues so tired, but it's got its own stuff. Yeah. But that's kind of where the gender dynamics angle is. And then parallel to that, I grew up in a very coaching environment. My dad is now a coach. Back awesome. When I was growing up. Yeah, awesome now. Back then, I resisted it. Like, oh my God, like my dad being a coach. He put me through, right? Like, you resist your parents. At least I resist my parents.
It is. Like, what is that anyway? Exactly. Back then, right?
Exactly. And like, I remember he gave me all the books, like the Tony Robbins books and all of the different, self-help books. And I was like reading them and reading about The Secret. And then he put me through my first ever coaching qualification, my NLP, when I was 17, which it changed my life. I was a 17-year-old. Yeah, I was 17. I'd actually been suffering from anorexia, so I wasn't very well. Again, another symptom of toxic femininity. And I did my NLP qualification. I remember being like, it was like a really intensive retreat where I did the qualification. I applied all the methodology. I basically had to coach myself. Yeah. It was really powerful. And that's when I was like, okay, this coaching stuff is powerful. Like, it's life-changing. And I went on to work in different spaces. Like, I, graduated and kind of forgot about coaching. But then when I came back to behavioral science and I was kind of back to being exposed around coaching, I was like, okay, this is really interesting stuff. And I like the one-on-one aspect. So then I eventually went to work for a really big coaching company thinking I'm going to do DE&I coaching. That didn't happen, but I did end up deciding to leave and train to be a coach myself. And I played around with do I want to become a D&I coach? And then I was like, I think the truth is I'm going to burn out. I think I'm going to burn out doing that. I think it's such difficult work. And I don't know if I'm the right person to even do it. And so I started building my little coaching practice. There's a third prong to this really long story, sorry. But I started building my coaching practice.
It's interesting though.
Okay, cool. Thank you. And in the coaching practice, I basically started out by coaching founders. Because of my days in philanthropy, I had a really big network of founders. So I was like, I'm going to go back to the founders of nonprofits, the philanthropists. And as I was coaching the founders, I noticed a common theme. And pretty much every single person I was working with suffering from anxiety, burnout, stress. When I really drilled down into where is that coming from, why is it that these incredibly smart, intelligent, ambitious, brilliant people are suffering from such loneliness, such anxiety? When I drilled down into it, I realized, oh, it's a relationships issue. They don't have a strong relationship to themselves because they've self-abandoned in the pursuit of their ambition. And in the process, they don't actually have many healthy relationships around them, let alone a healthy, intimate relationship. And so that's kind of what made me think, okay, well, there's something going on here. And so I kind of merged the two, the gender dynamics work, the kind of the emphasis on equality and inclusion with working with this demographic. And now I'm a relationship coach. And the final prong I'll say is throughout all of this, I was knee deep in studying the topic because I myself was previously engaged and I thought I was going to get married. I had the wedding planned. I had everything. I had all my ducks in a row, but it was the wrong person completely. And, in the process of kind of realizing it's the wrong person, I myself was doing a lot of coaching, a lot of like relationship therapy, relationship counseling, marital counseling with him. Like, just really studying and trying to understand, how is it that here I am, someone who's got my life pretty much together. You know, I love my job. I have a nice home. I lived in Canada at the time. How is it that I don't feel happy in this relationship? And I can't tell why. I don't think he's happy in the relationship. And yet, you know, we look picture perfect. We look like we should be together. Our Instagram's lovely. Everyone thinks we're great. But I can tell that there's something wrong. And it took a lot of coaching and figuring it out, like a lot of figuring it out.
Yeah.
I was very lucky that I worked in behavioral science. I had a lot of money to throw at this because I was very well paid. But eventually I ended up calling off the engagement, going knee deep into trying to figure it out myself when I was single in my 30s, and just like, you know, I don't want to be dying alone. I want to figure this out.
Yeah.
And in the process, I was very lucky that I went on to meet my now husband. And I think one of the main takeaways with that was I met him after I did 11 months of really intense work, like really, 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 like now there's 11 months of my kind of spiritual journey trying to figure it out is what makes up my system. But in any case, I think my final kind of point was that everything that led me to him was not the stuff that led me to my ex. And that's what really made me realize, like, okay, I'm a high achiever. I consider myself very ambitious and very go-getting. I consider myself someone to have my life pretty much figured out. And yet I didn't get it right the first time. My clients haven't necessarily got it right the first time. And when I distill it, I'm like, there are common themes here of where we're getting in our own way without realizing we're getting in our own way.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, it makes plain. It's almost like you don't know what you don't know. You
Exactly.
know what I mean? In terms, and, you know, and speaking of, you know, the work that you did with a lot of the CEOs and founders, do you find that the disconnect in terms of like, we're not understanding why we don't have why we can't build good relationships and don't have good relationships? Do you find that, hey, it really stems from childhood? Like maybe, I feel like either a lot of people haven't seen a good relationship while they were children, or either saw disruptive relationships. And so we base our patterns off what we see and kind of almost what we're taught in the home. And so we grow up in this way of like, well, this is what I know how relationships to be. And then I attract those same kind of people that I have either turmoil with or just not good people for me, because I feel like either I'm trying to fill a void or it's just because I did not have a good representation. Did you find that a lot of that goes back to their childhood?
Absolutely. Yeah, 100%. That's kind of like, you know, module 1 of the work with me. It's like, let's take a look. I'm not a therapist. Like, I'm not going to dig through your childhood. There's no need for that. But absolutely, like the patterns are so clear to draw. And I think what I find really interesting is how, because like high achievers or, you know, successful executives, whatever you want to call them, most people have probably done some therapy, right? Most people have probably done some therapy. They probably have some awareness of childhood patterns. And what I find, and I had the same thing, they come with this kind of this lens of like, well, I've done some therapy, I've done the work, I know the patterns, so this can't be affecting my relationships. Like, I've done the work. And I was like that too. And I hear this with so many of my clients, of like, but I've done this already. It can't be that. And it's like, but it might be that. And it might be that we're looking at things in a slightly skewed way. Like, it's a very different practice to know something intellectually and to be able to look at your patterns and your childhood patterns and see them rationally, logically, intellectually, and a very different practice to embody the transformation of those patterns into something healthy that allows for growth. And it's the embodiment piece that I see the high achieving execs struggling with, because by very nature of being high achieving and successful, we're often disembodied. Because being embodied as a successful executive, it doesn't really work. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, if we're actually going to be embodied on a day-to-day basis, we're probably not going to be hardcore, high-achieving, successful executives, because it's not normal to be
Yeah.
working so hard or traveling around the world or living on a plane or jumping from meeting to meeting. And I do this myself. Like, I have back to back to back calls, and I'm very aware. I'm like, okay, I need to actually get back into what I teach and not drift into the hardcore high achiever headspace. So it's very different to know something rationally and to live it.
Yeah. It is. Wow, this is such fascinating, like to understand it in terms of like, how you process relationships. And like you said, high achievers, they're always so busy. That's why people always wonder, women who are truly high achievers, really successful, and why they have hard times maintaining relationships.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? It's always that question of, well, why this person, they're such a great person, they accomplish all this great stuff, but they can't maintain good relationships. Not even sometimes personal, romantic, and it's hard for them to maintain those relationships. So you always wonder what that is.
Yeah, and I'm glad you raised that, because that's a really interesting point. And again, something I used to do for sure, and probably still do. I'm sure my husband would be like, you still do this, Kat. But this is kind of where the gender dynamic stuff is really interesting.
Yeah,
I think we've all heard, right, of the high-powered, smart, successful female executive or female founder who we live in a masculine world, right? Like, we live in capitalism is a masculine energy. Like, let's not beat about the bush. Like, to go and create and to build and to do all of this kind of capitalist energy, it is a masculine practice. And so I think it's not news to anyone that if we want to succeed, quote unquote, in the modern day world professionally, there has to be, quote unquote, some kind of masculine energy behind it. Now, there are,
100%.
Right? Yeah, like that's kind of the most common thing. Yes, there are more feminine leaders coming out, and there's kind of more feminine leadership, and like massive round of applause to that. That being said, that's probably in the minority still. I would argue that most leaders, even the very most like kind of the feminine leadership types out there, they still have to be in their masculine if they want to go out and start building and creating. And I mean, literally, I hate to say it, but like penetrating the male world out there, like making themselves known, right? It's a masculine energy.
Yeah, 100%.
And so what I find is, and this is where it gets really interesting, these kind of like high achieving, high powered women, when I work with them, the narrative that I hear, and I used to say the same thing, is, well, whoever I date or whoever I'm in a relationship with has to be more masculine than I am. So they have to be more high powered, earning more money, have more achievements, more success, more assets, more homes, whatever it might be, have more of a career, because they have to like out masculine me. And again, I used to be like that. When I look at my criteria of who I thought I'd end up with, I was like, I remember saying to my mom, actually, after I pulled off with my ex-fiance, I was like, I'm only going to date millionaires from now. I'm like, what a stupid thing to say. What a stupid thing.
A lot of women think that way.
So stupid.
But you're right, it's so unrealistic.
Right. And just like how, like, what a dumb thing. Anyway, but my headspace was like, no, like, because actually when I look back at my previous engagement, like, yeah, I think I did like out masculine my partner in many ways, and I don't think it worked, and it led to infidelity, and that wasn't healthy. And so my vow was like, well, I have to be with someone who's, an alpha, quote unquote, or like someone who's more masculine and more dominant and someone who can lead me. And this is why a lot of women end up dating men who are so much older or dating kind of paternal figures, right? And it's very normal. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's the right fit, because what happens then is what we're doing, we're taking their kind of superficial masculinity, there's like a kind of superficial and deep masculinity, as a proxy for their personality. And there's this idea that like, well, if they've got money and status and power, they're somehow more masculine, and therefore they're somehow a good match for me. It's completely flawed. Because actually, if you're a high achieving, high powered woman who wants to be ambitious and create and build and leave a legacy on the planet, then the reality is you actually probably need quite a feminist man who's going to be, advanced, modern, with his wits about him, who's going to support you and respect you and allow you to create and not get jealous and not get intimidated. And that's not going to be the superficial masculine, which actually, if we really break down that superficial masculine of that big alpha breadwinner, there's a lot of toxic masculinity traits in that.
Oh yeah.
Right?
A lot of them.
And so
control.
Yeah, exactly. And so, and I mean, I had this with one of my exes too, when I was like, I really want like a, dominant older man. And in the end, I was like, well, I became his assistant. And I was like, well, this doesn't feel good. And
or either they treat you like their child.
Absolutely. Yeah, exactly. That paternalistic dynamic. And so it's kind of really flawed dynamic where, yeah, you get really smart, wonderful women looking for even more smart, wonderful men, but actually they end up dating men who, frankly, are in the toxic masculinity space. And they completely miss the men who have a more healthy, integrated masculine, which actually manifests as more of a feminist energy, if I dare say that word. I know that word's been like butchered by everyone, but what I'm talking about is a more like modern lens, right?
Yeah.
But that healthy masculinity, like that's harder. There's no like external proxy for that. A healthy masculine man can be very wealthy or not very wealthy at all. Like money is not a good indicator of that. It's more about how does he conduct his life? How much integrity does he have? How stable is he? How secure is he? How much consciousness does he bring to every interaction? Can you trust him? These are the things to look at for a healthy masculine, right? Not like money and job and how many exits has he had. Yeah.
And that's so true that I think with the age of social media, it gets so people view and perspective of what a man should be is so diluted because everyone thinks it has to be that guy with money. Everyone thinks it has to be this guy on this certain level. And it's so funny because I have a lot of my friends who are single and over 40 and we talk about this all the time. And I'm like, I feel like a lot of women are going for the same type of man, which is why they feel like, oh, there's no men out there. And I'm like, there are men out there. You're just looking for this, like you said, high earner, this high achiever, this person who got to have way more than you coming in.
Yeah.
Instead of looking at a man's true character, one who is hardworking, who's, like you said, who's going to be honest and loyal, has integrity. It's and I just feel like social media has a lot to attribute to that.
100%. No, you're spot on. And I'm glad that you actually said social media, because I think that's one of the things I talk about a lot is how like pop culture, the popular narratives out there, they oversimplify everything. I think we all know that toxic masculinity is a bad thing now. No one's really talking about toxic femininity though. And toxic femininity is the very same energy that's actually perpetuating this idea that, well, I need like the alpha breadwinning, high earning dude. And no one's saying you can't have that, but that shouldn't be the main thing, right? Like as you said, the values are much more important. And they're where the true core and the essence of that human being is.
Yes. Yeah. That's what's truly important. Let me ask you this, because I think it's fascinating that you lived and worked in like 6 different countries. And so how do you think those experiences shape your views on relationships and personal growth?
That's a really good question. And I think it humbled me because I think I went in, like growing up in the, I was educated in the UK and I had very traditional ideas of I actually look back at who I was when I was like 21 and how I behaved with some exes. And I'm like, God, I didn't think I even like myself. And I don't say that in a horrible way, but more of I think I was really naive. I think I had a lot of ideas of, like kind of toxic femininity, like princessy ideas of, well, this is how a man should be, because I grew up in quite a privileged UK town. Went to a really good girls' school. I went to a good university. And so what I saw was like one model of it. And the narratives that I got was like one model of it. And it was actually like, living in Spain, I didn't really get that narrative challenged much. But I think it was just all the different, actually, if anything, I'd say studying it really humbled me and gave me a new perspective. But living in Canada was certainly very eye-opening because I remember coming across male friends it was in Vancouver in the West Coast, like male friends who I made that seemed almost like very feminine in the way that they approached emotions and their vulnerability and their sensibility. And I remember, again, I think probably in 2018 when I moved out there was a bit of resistance to it and a bit of like, oh, I don't know about this. But now I can't imagine not being with that. Right. And it's no coincidence that my partner's Canadian, but I definitely got a more nuanced, I think a softer version. I think as I'm thinking through this, it's almost like in seeing all the different cultures and all the different religions and ways of being that I exposed myself to, I realized the common denominator was humanity. And like my favorite book is called Written on the Body by Jeanette Winterson. And the whole book is about a narrator and their experience of love. And you don't actually know the gender of the narrator. And you don't even realize you don't know the gender of the narrator until the end of the book when someone says, by the way, there's no gender of the narrator. And you're like, what? And the whole point is that at the end of the day, we're all human and we all have masculine and feminine parts to ourselves. We're all integrated, whole human beings who have the same emotions, the same fears, right? The same desires fundamentally. Like, yeah, all those constructs are, I don't know, they're kind of fallible.
Yeah. That's what I mean. Like, because you lived in so many different places, like it had to, in so many different ways that people interact, men, the hierarchy, as you said. So I know it had to have some effect on your personal growth and just how it influenced you.
Yeah.
And another thing I thought is interesting is that, as you said, I'm sorry, I had to clear my throat. My throat's bothering me. Like I said, you battled some real challenges. Anorexia, calling off your engagement to someone you thought was for you, but realized that this wasn't the one for me. So how did those experiences influence the way you approach coaching?
That's a really lovely question. And I think if I actually hadn't had those experiences, I wouldn't be a coach, right? Because I think, like, if I would never, no offense to coaches out there, but like, I wouldn't go into coaching thinking I'm going to go make £1 million.
Yeah.
I know there are some coaches who yell from the rooftops about making tons of money, but it's never something that I would come at, as a professional choice. Like, the coaching really came from a place of service. And when I first learned about coaching and I started practicing the coaching, it came from a place of, I was 17. I'd had anorexia. I hadn't even been to uni yet. I had no idea about the corporate world. And I just thought, I want to serve people. I want to help. And now later in life, it's really come from a place of, really the context to it was, just to add another whole thing to the mix, my dad lives in Ukraine. So when I'd called off my engagement and then I was in Canada for the Christmas, like trying to it was a few months into being single again, and like my whole world had just collapsed. Like I think it was the darkest point in my life. I truly didn't know what to think, what to do. I was in my 30s and I was like, oh Christ, do I have to go back to scratch now? I can't do this. And all my money was tied up in a property with him and I couldn't sell it. And it was COVID, so I couldn't even go back to the UK to be with my family.
Yeah.
Awful. And then just as I was kind of climbing out of a deep depression, and my apartment flooded as well. It was like $40,000 of damages. It was just awful. But as I climbed out of a depression, and I think I had about 2 weeks of feeling pretty good about life. And then Ukraine war started, and my dad lives in Ukraine. And that was like, I've never felt so much fear in my life, because hand on my heart, I thought there was going to be a nuclear holocaust. I was prepared for everything just to end. And I was following the war 24/7. And like my dad was on the phone crying his eyes out. He was a refugee at one point. And when all of that kind of happened, and on the back of the engagement ending, I just was like, what is the point? Because in my head, I was like, I actually don't know how long we have left to live. Like truly, I honestly thought we were all going to die. And I was like, I don't know what's going to happen. And that's when I was like, well, why would I be doing corporate? Like, not that I liked my corporate job, but I was like, I don't know if I'd be doing this in my last week of being alive.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
And I just had this really big epiphany. And so I came back to the UK and I relocated back to the UK and I started working for another corporation. And again, I was making great money, living in Kensington, and everything looked picture perfect. But I was just like, this all feels hollow and I don't know why I'm doing it. And I think I have a lot of grief that I need to process and kind of transmute through my body. And just life looked very different. And so as I kind of came out of that and then went on to meet my partner, that's when I was like, well, I don't really know what I want to do in my life actually anymore.
Yeah.
I know I don't want to go back into working for a corporate. I know I don't want to go work for a tech company right now. So I'm just going to go and help people, and probably help people who have gone through a similar process. Because, at this point I was like, well, I'm very lucky. I met my husband like 11 months after calling off my engagement. Like that's rapid fire time.
That is.
Super fast, right? And
we call that a win.
Absolute win. And I'm so lucky because I actually think had all of this stuff not happened, all of this hardship, I probably wouldn't be doing so much therapy. I wouldn't be doing so much coaching. I wouldn't have been like, right, I'm going to prioritize my healing. I would have just kind of, got on with it. So I'm actually very lucky. But in any case, it just made me think I just want to help people and serve. And like, really, what more is there to life than helping people, especially helping people through what we've been through, right? Because we know it well.
I think when you lead with a heart for service, that's how and success just automatically comes. Yeah. You know what I mean? Yeah. Because your heart is in service mode where you like, I really want to help someone. And I love the story you told when it comes to, because I always ask entrepreneurs, when did you take that leap? You know what I mean? Because a lot of the time that leap into entrepreneurship, and you kind of told your whole story there. And because I tell people all the time, some people leaps are intentional. And then there are other people leaps who are unintentional. Yeah. And the unintentional are people who get divorced and husband leaves them with nothing. They have to fight and figure it out, or get laid off or get fired from a job. And then they're like, hey, I've been wanting to do something. I feel like now this is my opportunity to do so. So your leap was so amazing because you're like, you know what? I don't want to go back to corporate and do this anymore because I don't love it. Yeah. I'm not emotionally connected to it anymore. It's not really fulfilling. Yeah. Right. And it's like, I want to do something that help people. Yeah. Where I know I'm giving back and I'm helping people get through overcome some of the things that you've overcome. Absolutely. Too. I love that.
Absolutely. And there was also like this very kind of real, because like when I met my husband, he was in Canada. I was back in the UK. We were long distance for 3 months. And there was also this kind of feeling of, okay, well, if I stay in the UK, then he's not going to come here. He can't come here because we weren't married at the time. We were just dating. So it's like, he can't come here. I don't want to move all the way back to Canada after having just moved back from there like 6 months ago. I was like, I physically can't. And that's when it was like, well, why don't we just maybe take a sabbatical and travel, and kind of country hop and dodge borders for a little bit and see if we want to be together. And I think I lasted about 2 weeks of my sabbatical before I was like, I want to do something. I'm gonna train to be a coach, and I'm gonna just start building a little coaching business, and then it kind of all snowballed from there. If someone had told me a year ago that I'm going to be a full-time coach, I would have laughed. I would have been like, what are you saying?
I know, because it's like at one point you're like, no, I got this job. It's paying well. This is what I'm doing. Like you can't even imagine it, because it was the same thing for me. Yeah. Let me ask you this: when it comes to high achievers, like executive and business owners and founders, what do you think are some of the unique relationship hurdles that they face most?
Really good question, and I think we touched on one of them earlier. This kind of projection of what they expect from a gender perspective, and that's not unique to high achievers, but I think what I see a lot of is, either very high-powered men who are very ambitious, very driven, very successful. They're traveling all the time, but they still want a family. And so in order to get that, they have a stay-at-home wife. And so that stay-at-home wife, she's either traveling with them and therefore has to give up her own career, or they think she has to give up her own career. I'm a big advocate that she doesn't, but the narrative is she'll probably be younger because I'm now old and, I've been building my company. She'll be younger, she'll probably stay home, and she'll probably raise the kids. And I'm going to be the breadwinner, and I'm going to be the absent one, and she can stay home. And the problem with that I see is it's not that likely she's going to be very intellectually fulfilling for you, right? And it's also not that likely that she's going to enjoy your lifestyle when you're traveling around all over the world and she, poor thing, is stuck at home. So let's actually reevaluate that strategy and think about, what would it look like to date someone who maybe works remotely and can travel with you and can contribute to the household income to take the pressure off you, and maybe even collaborate with you and ideate and actually join your business? Who knows? And so that's kind of one limitation I see. And then with women, it's the same one we talked about earlier, of wanting to date like an ultra alpha, and either never being able to find anyone that's more successful than them. I see that of like, just no one I meet is my match. It's really lonely at the top. Like a lot of women feel really lonely at the top. Completely missing the phenomenal men around them. I've run into some women who they have such strict criteria around the salary the man needs to have and the status and the schooling. And it's like, I get it. I used to do the same thing. Yeah. Like my husband doesn't tick any of those boxes, but he's utterly what I need, right? Like he's exactly what my heart needs. I just didn't know it back then. So that's one thing. And then I think the other the other struggles I see a lot of is this, by way of being high achieving and kind of go-getting, that often stems from a kind of anxious childhood of needing to prove something to the family because of a lot of responsibility and pressure, right? Like I can relate to that. A lot of my clients have that. And so that desire to prove, that desire to achieve, that desire to kind of perform is rooted in a low self-worth and like not believing that you're worthy by just way of being, existing. And so that kind of low self-esteem often leads a lot of really brilliant minds to stay in relationships that aren't very good for them because they're afraid of rocking the boat and they're afraid of leaving and they're afraid they won't find anyone. There's a big fear of failure, of like, you know, I'm 39 or I'm 40 plus and I haven't got kids yet. And I'm in this relationship that I'm not happy in with this person who I don't think is the right one for me, but I'm too scared to leave because what does that mean? I'm back single.
Yeah.
Again, I can relate to that. It's that like intense pressure and perfectionism. Yeah, and then often a real tendency to like lean in and do all the work because, you know, they're letting the partner off the hook again because they're a high achiever. They're like, well, I'm just going to fix it. I'm going to take all the responsibility and I'm going to fix it. And if the partner's not actually doing anything, then it's like, well, hold on, it's a two-way street. But again, high achievers will often do all the work. That's just kind of like a handful that come to mind.
Yeah. And like I said, because we always see so many women at the top, and you're right, a lot of women have a long list that they want men to have. And it's just so unrealistic. Not even women I've met that is not even high achievers, to be honest with you, Katerina. And they have like a long list of what this man must have. And I'm like, well, that's the reason why you don't have anybody, because the person that's on this list doesn't even really exist, because people come with their own issues. We are human, like you said.
Absolutely.
So we have to be able to kind of get rid of. So when a client comes to you, especially a woman with a list, what do you tell them to do with that list?
I'm like,
do you
tear up the list?
Exactly.
No,
let's throw that away.
No, but 100% though, because I remember my coach actually, my older coach, she was just like, you shouldn't say this in your marketing. Like, people don't want to hear it. And I was like, but it's true. And the message, which I am going to say here, so please don't hate me, but the message is like, often what we think we want isn't what we actually need, right? And like by that I mean, I had my list, and I'm not even joking, my first fiance ticked every single freaking box, like every box. I remember like I actually like gleefully would look back at my list and I was like, wow, I manifested this is exactly what I wanted. And like, wow, Lord,
manifestation.
Yeah, I was like, the secret, great. And it did tick all my boxes, like literally from like the height, the university, the looks, like the family, the work, and everything, all kind of the external stuff, and a lot of like the values and personality there too. But what I really missed, and what I have now, is back then I wasn't being honest with myself about who I am deep down in my core. I thought I was being honest with myself back then, but I didn't know myself back then the way that I know myself now. And what I thought I needed was certainly not what I needed. And now, having done so much inner work, which really was fueled by that breakup and fueled by me being like, holy cow, where did I go wrong with this? Now that I'm so clear on like what I need to live a happy and fruitful life, and when I got that clarity, that's when everything else, all kind of the external list items, like fell away, because suddenly I was actually down to like 5 core needs, like really simple 5 things that I really need, and the rest I knew I'd figured out. And that's when I mean, my husband tells the story to everyone, but like we met at a dance floor at a music festival, and it was, I say it was dark, he says it was light. I mean, I'm pretty sure I was quite inebriated, but he like tapped me on the shoulder. He had sunglasses on. I didn't know what the hell he looked like. And I remember just turning around and feeling that energy. And I like threw my arms around his neck and like gave him a big hug. And, you know, I was really enthusiastic. And then we went on and we like danced together. And I barely knew anything about him. But I remember just feeling in his presence, feeling safe, a little bit excited, and like, okay, this is kind of cool. And then got his details. And, you know, over time, we had like 3 dates before we went on to be long distance. But I knew pretty much by date 3 in like the conversations that we'd had, which were pretty deep and intense for 3 dates, but I knew that from a needs perspective, I was like, oh, he really gets me. He really gets who I am and what I need. And on the exterior level, we were very different. Like so many of my external things that I wanted to tick off, he didn't and doesn't tick off. Because again, they were like proxies for what I thought I needed.
Yes.
Right? So,
yes.
Yeah.
We live that way. Because I tell people all the time, my husband is not my typical guy that I would normally date.
Yeah.
He really isn't. And you're right. It's like I had a list. I didn't have much on my list. I just had a few things, but I'm like, he didn't really like meet the criteria.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But we share so many different values when it comes to family, and so certain things attracted me to him. But I tell women all the time, I tell friends, I'm like, listen, a lot of times that guy that you so used to dating, this one particular type of guy, that's normally not the guy you're going to end up with. And if you end up with that guy, that's because you actually chose to, because I don't know what it is. I was talking to a friend the other day, Katarina, I think, and she said something to me that I think was kind of like eye-opening. I said, I don't know what that is, that what we do as humans where we know something is not good for us, but yet we continuously date that same type of guy, knowing how is the outcome, what it's going to be, the same traits. And she said that, you know what, I think is something in us that I guess is hopeful. Maybe it is hope. I don't know, but we continue to date that person because maybe we're hoping that this person would be who we exactly want them to be, or who we think they're going to be. And I just don't understand why we do that. We repeat the same habits, the whole definition of insanity, and thinking that it's going to be a different outcome.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I wondered there, I was like, is it maybe partly like the subconscious mind drawing in the very thing that we need to see and, be repelled by and have that awareness? But I wonder less actually that. And I'm curious if it's maybe just we get stubborn. Like, I think I just was stubborn,
that's
right?
true.
I think when I was single, I felt so defeated and so tired and like just discouraged by everything. And I didn't have the support and resources to really dig deep and find out what it is that I need. Like, I had it eventually, but for a long time I didn't know what I needed. And so I just didn't know any better, I think. And also, go on.
No, I think you're right. I think it has a lot with that. We don't know any better because we're used to a certain thing and we don't know there's something better out there. You know what I mean? So we are so used to a certain way of treatment where it's like, and then when you do get something that's different, and I notice this too, when we get something that's different, it becomes like, oh, I don't want this. The man that's overly attentive and, because we always say, oh, I want somebody that's going to be into me, someone that, just takes me out and do all this stuff. And then you meet that guy, but because physically he doesn't look like the way you thought he should, but he's giving you everything you asked for, then it becomes, oh no, he's weird. It's that he's giving me a weird energy.
Exactly.
I've heard this.
No, you're spot on. And actually, something really interesting and like really dark, actually. I talked to one like behavioral scientist, and she was saying how a lot of like dating relationship coaches don't want to work with women after the age of 42. And I was like, why? That sounds absolutely awful, because I've got clients in their 40s and 30s and whatever. And she was like, well, it's because, after the age of 42, a lot of women are very stuck in their own biases of what they want and what they're addicted to. Because on a nervous system level, they're used to being treated badly. They're used to the drama and the kind of the yo-yo of emotions of like hot, cold and all that stress, that actually when they meet someone who's very secure, it's very unfamiliar to them. And I mean, I would argue probably not even 40s. I think it's like happens in their 30s too, right? Like, if we don't know what stability and security and safety looks like within our own nervous systems, because we don't give it to ourselves, right? Then because maybe we're in a toxic job and we don't give ourselves any time out, we don't have a therapist and we don't have a coach and all this stuff, then when we encounter someone who's actually healthy, it's probably going to be quite boring. That's what I tell my clients. I'm like, healthy, secure dating should be like a 6 to an 8 out of 10. If you're feeling a 9 or a 10 out of 10, something's off. Like, it shouldn't be that like
Yeah.
fireworksy. Like, again, when I met my husband, there was like mini fireworks, but I was still like, I still slept at night and ate my food. You know, I wasn't like losing my
Yes.
mind.
It's yes. I think people have the expectation of thinking like, oh, I'm supposed to feel butterflies and, you know, I'm supposed to feel this. And you're like, not
No.
necessarily, really. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like you like the person, you think something's interesting about them, but I can honestly say that I didn't get any butterflies when I met my husband. I didn't even think I would even marry him, to be
Yeah.
honest with you. Like, I wasn't even thinking on that. I was just, oh, it seemed like he's fun. I'll go out with him.
Yeah.
Why not?
Yeah.
But, and here we are, married 6 years.
No, exactly. That's amazing. That's amazing. And I think you're spot on, right? And I think that's when, if we think about like social media and the pop culture, that's where a lot of the toxic narratives of like, if you're not feeling that spark,
Yes.
no spark means, you know, it's a no-go. Where I'm like, but the spark is often actually like a horrible Freudian trigger that just is it's like trauma bonding. Don't go there. You don't want that. You want to feel safe, stable, calm, peaceful, relaxed, a bit curious, maybe a little bit excited, maybe one butterfly floating around in there, but nothing wild, right? And again, I think that's why women often get stuck in that drama of like chasing the same kind of guy who's not the right one for them, but they tick the boxes and they feel exciting.
Yeah. There it is, the ticking on the boxes. Let me ask you, how do you coach a high achiever on balancing their career and trying to have a fulfilling personal life? How do you coach that person on that?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And the simplest way of kind of putting, I mean, everything's obviously case specific, but the simplest way of thinking about it is like intentionality. And
yes,
right, it really is just about intentionality. Like, for example, it's, you know, nearly 8 p.m. I have another call after this. I'm going to be done at 9 today. And I was done at 9 yesterday. And I'm probably going to be done at like 9 tomorrow. And I work crazy hours right now. But my husband and I were very intentional with the time that we have together. Like we prioritize, we know what are the things that we want to prioritize. We know how intentional to be with those certain things. We don't just kind of like float like two ships in the night. We're very specific about our engagements. And then we also, when things get really busy, we bring in different relationship tools and exercises that are like little hacks to strengthen their connection. So cut to the chase. You know, if there's any kind of disconnect or any kind of tension, or either of us are feeling anything's off, we're like quick to fix it, quick to solve it. And I'm just kind of talking about my own instance, but it really does come down to intentionality and looking at, okay, well, how many hours am I working? How many hours am I present with that person? Getting clear on like what are our different needs and how can we meet each other's needs and be really intentional about coming together with the precious time that we have and discern, what do we value? What do we both need? Where are we both at? And do we need a quick reconnect, or are we actually okay? Like, it's like very intentional. That's kind of the best way I can say it.
Yeah, I like that. You know, your 90-day coaching program sounds really amazing. Can you give us like a little sneak peek in terms of like what's taught in that program and what person can expect out of it?
Yeah, I love that. Thank you for asking. Yeah, so this 90-day program is my 11 months condensed into 90 days. And I've taken all of the behavioral science of attraction that I've learned and plugged it into this kind of one-on-one, week-by-week engagement where really I'm holding a hand and walking you through it the same way that I wish someone had held my hand, because I didn't have that. I was, scrambling around trying to get all the support that I could. And so it's combined of like 3 key ingredients. The first one is liberation. So helping you liberate yourself from your past, from your limiting beliefs, kind of the belief systems that hold you back, from any patterns of self-sabotage, from any emotional baggage, any of the stuff that's keeping you stuck. And often you won't even know what that is, nature of having blind spots. And so my job is to come and help you and like really clear that out to set you free. So that's one of the key ingredients. The second one is behavioral science. So like we've been talking about in this entire podcast, there's so much rubbish out there in the world of dating and relationships that isn't helpful, that keeps us keeps us stuck again, makes us trip up and actually attract the wrong things and be unattractive to the right things. So yeah, the second component is looking at the behavioral science of dating and relationships and really re-educating ourselves on everything that we know from like gender dynamics to looking at the science and the psychology of dating and relationships, to looking at our core needs, to looking at attachment styles. We do a lot of work on that. That's kind of the second component. And then the third component is integrity. So having cleansed everything, having got clear on who you are and what you need on the behavioral science, on the gender dynamics piece, how can we bring your whole life into integrity with who you are, so that when you go out there and you are looking to meet people, dating and relationships isn't like another to-do list item. It's actually something that happens very organically and flows from just living your best life. Because really, that's kind of the main narrative that we get, right? Like, you'll find love when you're least expecting it, or love will just come fall in your lap. And it's like, yes and no. Like, sure, you might find love when you're not expecting it, but if you're not living in integrity with yourself and who you are and what you need, that might not be the right love. So let's prioritize getting the integrity piece in, and then allow the connections to unfold very organically. Because I hear a lot of fatigue with the apps, and a lot of fatigue of like, I can't, go on another date or whatever it is. So the third component is really that integrity piece. And we also look at the kind of like a bonus, but I think it's really important. I look at communication, and I look at different communication scripts and best practices. That's something that I've truly been studying since I was like 14. But looking at how can we communicate better, both in the early stages of meeting someone, about like who we are, our boundaries, our expectations. How can we have the difficult conversations about like, do we want children or not? Or do I want children or not? What kind of lifestyle do I want to lead? Like, what kind of ambition levels do I have in the early stages in the first 3 dates, rather than coming to these things like 5 months down the line, a year down the line. And also, how do you navigate conflict? How do you navigate tensions? So it's kind of like a bonus week that I include there in the 90 days, just because I think it's really important. But yeah.
That's awesome. Is there any clients that come to mind that you could say, hey, this was like a really standout success story that you can share?
I have one in mind, which I'm like, it is a success story, though it might sound a bit dark. I have one client, a really, really dear client, who, when he joined the program, he was actually in a relationship, and he just wasn't sure if it was the right one for him. He'd been with her for a couple of years, and he really wants a family, he really wants kids, and he's kind of past 40, and he was just terrified of, well, I'm stuck because I'm not happy. She doesn't want to work on the relationship with me. I do want to stay with her, I do want to marry her, but I also don't feel happy or safe with her, and I'm terrified of being single. So he's kind of really stuck in this place. And he had his own kind of stuff around, what it is to be a man and where he was at in life, etc., etc. So long story short, in working together, I'm really happy to say that he did actually end up leaving that relationship. And he's so much happier now. He's traveling the world. He's meeting phenomenal, interesting people. He actually met someone quite recently. Like, we've stopped working together now, but he texted me to share the good news. And I just see him being much more comfortable and authentic and relaxed. And like, there's a glow to him and a spring in his step. And really, that whole work that we had to do together, apart from kind of helping him get clear on like who he is and bringing him into integrity with himself, was also helping him get over the fear of what it is to be single.
Yeah.
That was a really interesting thing. There was a lot of fear, which I do see a lot of being single, and like, well, what happens if I do call this off? What happens if I do break up? Who am I going to be? And actually, if we can release that fear and set ourselves free, and then get into integrity, then we can very quickly, as I did, 11 months for me, meet the right person. So that's the one kind of that comes to mind. Just because I talked to him today, and it's like,
That's awesome. I think, you touched on something that's so important, is that fear, I think, is what truly holds us back from a lot of things. And that fear of being single is such a strong fear for people to get rid of, to fight. It's really something hard for them to do that. Can you share like maybe a small change that someone can do in their daily life that can lead them to more fulfilling relationships?
Yeah, really good question. Small change, I would say, is as you're going about your day to day, can you start to practice? I'm keeping it like really kind of basic and first step here, but can you start to just notice your connection to yourself? Like, can you start to drop down into your body a little bit more and start to connect with your heart, with your lower belly? Can you start to practice being a little bit more embodied? And can you start to ask yourself, like, from the heart, what is it that I really need right now? And just keep asking that question, like throughout the day, every day. Just drop the energy from the head down into the heart, into the lower belly, and keep asking yourself, like, what is it that I need right now? That question alone can transform everything, because if you can get really, really honest, and it might take a few days, it might take a few times of asking yourself if you're not used to it, but finding out, like, what is it I really need right now, you'll get some really surprising answers. If you can listen to that and then follow through with it, well, then you're building the muscle of self-trust. And if you build the muscle of self-trust, then your intuition will trust even more, your nervous system will get even more calm, your self-esteem will actually go up, the answers will come even more clearly. And then that's how you slowly begin to rework yourself into more integrity, greater integrity.
I love that. That's awesome. You're right. I think asking yourself those tough questions and not being afraid to say the answer is such a key thing in our lives, because we're so afraid to admit what we truly want.
Yeah.
Like, we really are, because it goes against what we're actually doing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Last question, because I know you have to go. Looking ahead, what future plans or goals do you see for yourself in your program?
Yeah, great question. So 2024 is going to be the year that I launch a group coaching program. So I'm really excited about that. Co-ed. It's going to be for all genders, and it really kind of came out from two things. One was wanting a more accessible, affordable option where I'm not constrained, doing lots of one-on-one and having to eventually raise my prices and blah, 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 but keeping something that's like accessible. And then two, well, actually there's three things. Two, I'm a huge believer in peer learning. Some of the most impactful transformations that I've had have come from a group setting where actually I can ask a question or other people can ask a question, and there's peer learning, and there's that kind of loads of mirrors being held up to me, and there's that community and support and hearing other people's experiences. So I'm a big fan of the group accountability and growth piece. But there are three, and it's kind of the funny one. So many of my clients always say to me, like, oh, Kat, everything I learned on this program is so amazing. I only wish I could meet someone who's done the same work. That's when I was like, well, if I can start creating community of people who have done this inner work and they graduate, then, by all means.
I know, right? Might as well turn into a day.
Exactly. But you have to go through the program first, do the work.
I know, right? You go through the program first, then you get on the
Exactly.
You can meet like-minded people together.
Exactly. Yeah.
This has been such a good show, Katerina. I'm so happy you came on the show. I'm so fascinated by your coaching program and the fact there's so much science behind it, and so much that gender dynamics that I think a lot of us need to better understand and how it affects our relationships. So I thank you for coming on here. This was really awesome.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I gotta definitely have you back on the show for sure. Oh man. All right, guys, listen, I am Shani Sanders. This is the Girl Take No podcast, and we will talk to you next time.